Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second webinar of the project Feminists in the Climate Movement on behalf of the Green European Foundation in partnership with Polish Fundacja Strefa Zieleni and another Green Foundation from Finland, Green Economics Institute, and the Green Foundation from Belgium. I am today, last webinar, the first webinar, Polish webinar, was about just transition. We were in a very good company and give you the link to the first webinar during our session today. And today, after this just transition, we will speak about money and women. And why? Because without money, women cannot do anything. Money is really something that is necessary for actions to give and to guarantee real equality. Funds are absolutely necessary. And this is something that is a big problem. So today we will speak about the European Recovery Fund and the European Green Deal and the Polish Recovery Fund and what is the situation, how it is benefiting to women. I will ask our coordinator, one of our two coordinators of the project. The other one is Alexandra Geese, who was moderating the first webinar. Now Magdalena Gałkiewicz, she is the secretary of the Polish Green Party. And I didn't present myself. I'm Ewa Rumińska-Zimny. I am president of the board of the Polish Green Foundation Strefa Zieleni, and I am member of the board of the Green European Foundation. So Magdalena Gałkiewicz, our coordinator, I give you the floor and asking you to present our speakers.
Thank you, Eva. Hello, everyone. So I really warm welcome to our guests. It's really a great array of experts today. Firstly, I welcome Alexandra Geese, which is a member of the European Parliament from Germany, initiator of the Gender Impact Assessment NextGenerationEU report, and initiator also as well of the Half of It campaign. Our second panelist is Dr. Ewa Rumińska-Zimny, a feminist economist from the SGH Warsaw School of Economics, associated with the Congress of Women, and an expert on gender budgeting. And finally, Urszula Zielińska, our Green member of the Polish Parliament, who fights for women's rights within the Parliament and with protesters on the streets. Thank you very much, girls, for being here, and I'm sure that we will have an insightful discussion today. Well, so as Eva said, our topic is the European Green Deal and EU Recovery Fund and gender perspective on that. And here my first question to Alexandra Geese, because you are initiator on this report, Gender Impact Assessment, and could you please give us a visibility what this report was initialized for and what are the results of this report? And then also I would like to ask you about this campaign, Half of It, what it was about and what the results are. The floor is yours, Alexandra.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. Thank you very much, Eva, for those friendly words of introduction. Could I, and good evening to everybody listening, could I have my presentation on the screen?
Yes, I think I need to give you a role, or it's already done?
It is done. You can share the screen.
Done. Yeah, so you should share the screen. You have a button. On the bottom of the page, you have share screen button.
Here we go.
Yeah,
okay,
great.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so thank you all very much for this opportunity to present Next Generation EU, the Half of It campaign, and especially the gender impact assessment we did on Next Generation EU at a very early stage. So it's not a final gender impact assessment on what Next Generation EU became in the end, but it was something we did in the very beginning. And what you see here is the day we launched the campaign. That was in May 2020, and that's me and then the president of the Gender Mainstreaming Network of the European Parliament. Together, it was in full COVID, so we had to keep the distance, and we couldn't, we would have wanted to be a lot of women holding that, but we could only be 2 for COVID reasons and lockdown reasons. So this is how it all started. Why did it start? Okay, why did I demand half of it? It was quite clear that already in April 2020 that COVID was not only a global health crisis, but it was also giving rise to a huge economic crisis, probably the worst recession the Western world has seen since World War II. And what was interesting from a gender point of view, that it was hitting women particularly hard, for a series of reasons. One was very obvious. I don't know how the situation evolved in Poland, but in many European countries, including mine, Germany and Italy, the other country that I know very well in Europe because I used to live there, the first thing to close were schools and childcare institutions. And when you close schools and childcare institutions, children just don't just go away. I mean, they still require being attended to, being taught, being cared for. And this is done in families, and families very often still means mothers. So many mothers had to work from home at the same time while they were taking care of their children, which whoever has ever tried to do that knows it doesn't work. So you first take care of your children and then at night you work rather than sleeping, which put a huge pressure on women. And many women had to reduce their working hours or drop out of the labor market altogether because it was impossible to handle. And the second reason why this was particularly hard on women is because COVID hit those sectors where people work with people, so-called client-facing sectors. And this is usually where women work. And you see a list of the sectors here. Let me see if I can go to presentation mode. Just give me a second. Did it before? Here, full screen. Okay, great. This is it. So those sectors that were particularly hit, you see them on the slide, were education, healthcare and social, which is surprising because we would think that those people had to do more work, but there's a lot of private healthcare, a lot of private social services that had faced a big crisis. Food and accommodation, so hotels and restaurants and so on, arts and culture, all the artists, and domestic services. And you see that in most sectors, there was a very, very high share of women. Retail is another one as well. So you see the purple part are women and the blue part are men. And you see that those sectors where women worked were particularly hit. Then as Greens, we fought very hard, especially as German Greens, in order to have Next Generation EU, therefore a help package that would be for the European economy, that would be funded and guaranteed for by all countries, including countries with a strong economy as Germany. But then when the EU Recovery Fund or Next Generation EU came, I was quite disappointed because there is a strong focus on the green transition, which from a green point of view, obviously is very good. 37% of the money goes to the green transition and 20% goes to the digital transition, which is also important. And I do digital politics. I know how important this is. But those are sectors where very, very few women work. And if you have a look at the sectors that benefit, it's basically construction. Then agriculture is a little bit apart. It's listed here, but it's not really in Next Generation EU now. Construction, energy, renewable energies, and transport. This is basically the green transition. Those are the three sectors concerned. And those are industrial sectors where the share of women being employed is below 20%. And then the fourth one is ICT, information and communication technology, for the digital transition. The Europe-wide share of women working in that area is 17%. So what I noticed in May was we have a crisis that is hitting women for a series of reasons. And we have a recovery package to support the economy, and that means to support the people, that is earmarked to male-dominated sectors. So women are losing jobs or have to drop out of the labor market and do more unpaid work, and the money is going to the men. And I think this is not possible. I mean, it's so obvious in this crisis that this is not right, that I need to do something about it. And therefore we asked, you know, this was basically an intuition in May, and I couldn't prove it in any way. It was just a feeling I had from talking to trade associations and concerned women, and then looking at the first proposal of the Commission that didn't even mention women, basically, it didn't mention a gender perspective at all. And therefore, we asked two economists to do a gender impact assessment on this first proposal of the Commission, which is what they did. And they found out that actually NextGenerationEU, as it was proposed by the European Commission, was completely gender blind and didn't absolutely take into account the gender perspective. And it confirmed everything I explained before. Okay, how does this go forward? Sorry. Okay, here we go. So the study was conducted by Dr. Elisabeth Klatzer from Austria and Dr. Azzurra Rinaldi from Italy. And it concluded, as I said, that most of the money would be invested into male-dominated sectors, and that the proposals were not living up to the EU legal obligations, nor to the political commitments of the European Commission. And therefore, it recommended that in addition to the focus on the digital and the green transformation, we needed a further emphasis on investment in paid care work. The care transition was another goal we had. Therefore, what did we demand in the Parliament's position? First of all, the inclusion of gender equality as a binding principle into the guidelines for the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Which is the Recovery and Resilience Facility is the core of NextGenerationEU with 670 billion euros. Then we asked for gender mainstreaming to be a horizontal principle. And very specifically, we asked for gender impact assessments to be done on the national plans. You know, this facility works in a way that the European Commission basically makes the money available, but the countries, the member states, have to set out a national plan and how they intend to spend that money. And that plan has to comply with the requirements set out in the regulation. So this is what we're talking about. So what we asked for, and at a certain point, we had a broad majority in Parliament where these gender impact assessments for the national plans, where for each national plan, experts would have had to look at every single measure and decide whether that's gender equal or not. And if it's not, what can be done about it? And that would have been, I think, really the silver bullet to make sure that men and women benefit equally, and to make sure that these funds are well spent, because if you don't do that analysis, you don't achieve growth, even less sustainable growth, and you don't really help the recovery of the economy. So that was our main point. Then we asked for sex disaggregated data, which is very important, because if we are saying the money is not going to the women, we have to give some evidence. And as long as you don't have that evidence, and as long as you don't have that numbers, it's very difficult to prove. And there's always someone saying, oh, it's not true, and women are married anyway. So I think we really need that data and that analysis. That's the basis really for gender budgeting. Okay, then there are a few more things that I will skip for sake of time, but I can share the presentation later if you're interested in seeing the details. So what did we get actually? We had a very, very strong position of the European Parliament. But as you know, the Parliament doesn't decide on its own, but it has to come to an agreement with the European Council. And the Council, where the member states' governments are represented, was dead set against any kind of gender perspective, even less gender impact assessments, gender budgeting, and so on. So we had a very difficult trilogue, which is that process in which the European Parliament and the European Council tried to find an agreement in order to come up with a regulation. And obviously we had time pressure because especially the southern countries in Europe really desperately need this money. So we had to be quick. And there were other things to negotiate. And as it often happens, the interests of women were not really supported the way they should have been supported. And we lost the really strong point of the parliament, which were the gender impact assessments. We came back then to, there is a guiding principle anyway in terms of gender mainstreaming, but it's not really binding and we don't have clear objectives and targets, and this is the problem we have today. I came after that happened, I went back to talking to the Commission, the task force Recover, which is really the task force working directly for the Commission President on this topic. And they were quite open for it. It's led by a woman, and they were quite open. And they agreed to taking up some of our recommendations in the guidelines. Well, they sort of listened to our recommendations and saw the data and the evidence we provided that it's useful. And then they came up with guidelines that the national governments had to abide by while setting out the plans. And these guidelines say that the member states need to describe how the measures will contribute to gender equality and the mainstreaming of these objectives. And they shall outline the most important national challenges in terms of gender equality, equality of treatment, opportunities between men and women. They need to explain what happened during COVID crisis to women and how the national plans foster gender equality, which is at least a requirement which forces member states to deal with the topic. So I'm not particularly satisfied with many of the answers that national governments are giving, but at least the topic has been brought up and they have to work on it, they have to think about it. And there are some very interesting plans like the Spanish plan, for example, some interesting things in the Finnish plan. So, I mean, there are some positive examples. I'm not satisfied on average, but there are some interesting things in the plan. So this is where I think we did achieve something, because at least the topic was talked about, especially in Italy. There was a really, really huge public campaign because a lot of journalists picked up the Half of It campaign and talked about it. So there was a growing awareness on how important economic independence is and how important women's jobs are for growth overall in a country, for social cohesion and for social justice. Where we did achieve something extremely important, on the other hand, was in the multi-annual financial framework, which is the 7-year budget for the European Union that starts, the next one starts the 1st of January 2021. It started actually, and runs until 2027. And there's a thing called the Interinstitutional Agreement on the Multi-Annual Framework. And there we have a provision on gender budgeting and gender equality that is really, really good. And for the first time, it's something very, very concrete where we can measure the progress the Commission is making. So it basically says two very important things. First of all, the assessment of gender impact needs to be strengthened in impact assessments and evaluations under the better lawmaking framework. So this is sort of Eurospeak. What it means is that the European Commission, every time it comes up with a legislative proposal, it has to do an impact assessment, which usually has 3 dimensions: the economic dimension, the social dimension, the ecological dimension, and it considers small and medium and the impact on small and medium enterprises. And so here, for the first time, they need to consider the gender impact as well. The new guidelines the Commission has come up with are not satisfying yet, but at least we have a legal basis really to work on this. And I think the Commission will be able to do better. What is really going well is the second requirement. The Commission has to develop a methodology to measure the relevant expenditure at program level, which means the money that is actually being spent in the multi-annual framework, and has to use this methodology as soon as it is available, and no later than January 1st, 2023, it will implement that methodology for certain centrally managed programs to test its feasibility. So what does it mean? It has to find a methodology to track where the money goes, to which beneficiary it goes, according to a gender perspective. So ideally, we end up with a budget that clearly says, okay, these funds from agriculture, 20% go to women, 80% go to men. I mean, we prefer to be 50-50, but I think that's not the reality. So if this works, we will have very, very clear numbers where this money is going and who is benefiting from it. And that will be really the political basis, having the facts to say, okay, how can this be gender mainstreaming? How can this be equality among citizens, between citizens, if 80% of the money is going to 50% of the population? We don't know what the numbers will be, but we can all imagine. So this is really, really important to have this tracking methodology. So at midterm, which is in the middle of these 7 years, starting from 2021, so it's going to be 24, 25, it will be explored whether that methodology can be extended to other programs for the remainder of the multi-annual financial framework. And the other programs means like the structural funds, agricultural funds, research, and so on. And that's extremely important because this means it's going to arrive in the member states. And the member states will have to come up with gender disaggregated data, and they will have to implement this. And I think this is going to be a huge debate. So I know it's a long time frame, 2024, 25 sounds very long, but considering how much time we've been speaking about gender budgeting and not been doing anything, I think this is really huge, huge progress. And this is something where we can work on. I've tried to start working on this in my member state, which is Germany, and in my region, basically, to try to come up with something similar, to raise awareness, to tell people, okay, this is coming anyway, whether you like it or not, but it's coming. And I know from my direct contact that the Commission, the Directorate General for Budget is really keen on doing this, because when they started really studying the topic and looking at all the material, they realized this is really key in order to have a sustainable and successful economy that allows for social cohesion. This is not only good for women, this is good for everybody. So I think this is really, really important, and we should keep working on it. One more element, there's a special report of the European Court of Auditors, which is the auditing body of the European Union. And these reports are held in very high esteem by the European institutions, and they're very interesting. And this one particularly, it's also easy to read, so I really recommend it to everybody. On gender mainstreaming in the EU budget. It formulates a series of recommendations, clearly strengthening the institutional framework for supporting gender mainstreaming, which means having better legislation, incorporating the gender perspective in the legislation. It asks the Commission to carry out gender analysis of needs and impacts, update its better regulation guidelines, which it has been doing, which it's been done. It's not satisfying, but there are further documents down the line, and we will insist on these documents being better than the first one. And then especially systematically collect, analyze, and report existing sex disaggregated data for the EU funding program. And that will mean that, like, for agricultural or structural funds, where a lot of money goes to Poland, for example, you will really have an instrument to ask for gender disaggregated data, and you will be able to prove where this money goes. And this makes it a lot easier to have a strong political message saying, okay, this is not just, this is not right, and we need to fight for more equality. So another recommendation on gender-related objectives and indicators, which is something the Commission is progressively incorporating in its budget. And obviously, as we said at the beginning, on the recovery and resilience plans, it says also we need to assess and report whether those gender equality objectives are being met. And we keep working on this. in the first round, as I said before, it looks as if the national plans are not addressing this adequately, but we are insisting on monitoring this correctly, and we will definitely come back to it. Okay, so this would be my round of introduction and first introduction to the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It's really interesting insight on the situation in the European Union. And I really think it's very important to have this data on European and national level and indisputable condition to go forward on this topic. And right now, I would like to ask Ewa Rumińska-Zimny, because you are an expert on gender budgeting. Could you please tell us what is exactly the gender budgeting? What is the idea? What is about? What is the history maybe in European Union? What are the competences of European Union on this matter? And is this any practice on European Union, or maybe in Poland? Ewa, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction. And maybe I will start with a short comment to what Alexandra has said. And I would like to congratulate on the steps, further steps in this battle to put gender issues really in the agenda of ministers of finance and economy, ministers who actually are responsible for the budgets and for where the money goes. I remember very well the discussion which we had in the European Parliament. I was at the hearings, a very small agenda item on the hearings for the budget which just ended in 2020. And these hearings were done, as I recall, in 2012. And it was around the report which was called Investing in Europe's Future. And this was about making Europe competitive, sustainable, and whatever. And then, the whole report has only one or two tables which were gender disaggregated as far as data are concerned. And they had a lot of discussion now how to make Europe competitive, how to improve the labor market, how to make Europe being a high-tech hub. But in fact, gender issues and equality issues were only in a small section, which was at the end of the report. And it was clearly said that in all European projects which were investigated in the past from the perspective of how the money are spent in these projects, the preambles of the projects has very nice words about core value, gender equality as a core value. But if they look at how actions were defined and how funds are allocated for this purpose, and also how indicators of problems were allocated, then you didn't see anything there. There was, for example, the goal was to improve the share of, they increased the employment rate, but there was not said about women and men. It was just about the general improvement in employment rate. So in fact, it was useless in terms of doing something. So what you presented now, it's reassuring because it's a next step forward. This is a discussion about how the money are spent, and I believe it's truly essential. Without that, I believe we will not achieve any progress in gender equality. This will remain on paper, and in fact, Poland is a EU member since 2004 and has all this wonderful legislation adopted, and nothing happens. For example, the wage gap, we still have 20% of the wage gap between women and men, even if it's in fact forbidden in Polish law, in the EU regulations and the other directive, etc. So I think gender budget is a great tool to achieve it. The problem is, of course, that you need so-called political will to do it, to start with. I will talk about that later on. Maybe I would just to say a few words, what it is gender budgeting and what are the experiences, and then I will move a little bit what is needed to actually do it. Well, it's rather simple because gender budgets, the first gender budgets were done by Australia in 1964, quite a long time ago. It was very up to the fashionable topic among the feminist economics research in 1980s, 1990s later on also. Elizabeth Klasser was one of the women and established a network of gender budgeting economists in Europe. So she's very, you know, you referred to her work, and I think it's fantastic what she has achieved. But many countries started to use it. Over 60, 70 countries now worldwide are using gender budgeting at different levels. You know, starting from Austria to Scandinavian countries like Sweden, but also UK has some recommendations on the UK budgets done by independent gender budgeting group. But also you do it at municipality level. Berlin, the city of Berlin is doing, city of Stockholm. You can do it also, San Francisco. You can also do it at the local community level. So you can do it at any level. And it doesn't mean that you will have a budget which is 50% for men, 50% of women. You will not also have a specific special budget for that. What you need to answer to the key question and make an evaluation of the existing budget of a city, municipality, local authority, or the country, to what extent it promotes gender equality or not. Because in the budget, you have always compromises, and money is never enough. So you have to decide if you, for example, build a parking lot or football stadium, or you will have investments in playground for kids or kindergartners. So you have to have the voices of men and women heard in the process of preparing a budget, any budget, national budget, but also the local community budget. Well, these voices of women are not heard. Women are not a decision-making position in the finance sector, but also in parliamentarian committees on the budget. Mostly. So their voices are not heard, and the requirements for the budget are really built according to the men's needs. You made a very wonderful slide showing, you know, where the money goes and what sectors are affected in pandemic. And this is very clear. It has always been like that. Male-dominated sectors were receiving funds, first of all. Later on, this was where women, the sectors when women was employed. This was in 2008, 2009 crisis. This was very clear picture. So what we need, in fact, we need to equalize through the gender budgeting process the bias, the gender bias in economics, and the way the economics rules and regulations were done for the labor market, for the finance sector, and so on. You know, the difference between the position of the men and women is because women are responsible for the unpaid work. And this unpaid work is not visible in the GDP calculations, similar as the green, the expenditure for the pollution and other cost side effects of the industrial development. It's the same. Unpaid work is not reflected in the GDP. In general, in European countries, it's over 1/3 of the GDP. It's a lot. In Poland, it's between 40 and 50% of the average wage. So this is a contribution which is completely invisible on the side of regional GDP, but it's also invisible on the side of how GDP is spent. What are the priorities and priority expenditure? So the gender budgeting is in fact showing the possibilities, how to do it. Is it easy or not to do it? No, it's not easy. It's not easy to do it because, as I say, you need to do it first to have a political will at the level of the national government. And certainly, if I may say about Poland, this will is not there. This will is still focused around a very traditional view, what should be a woman's role in a society and the economy, and what should be the male role. Men are considered to be the major breadwinners, and women are primarily mothers. So all the system which is in our plans for the future recovery is around that, to make women going back home through different sort of transfers, and to make them primarily be mothers, and then joining the labor market when it will be feasible, and men being the main sort of providers to the family. And this is whole structures around the a very traditional view of the family, a man and a woman, and then the kids. Single mothers, untypical families are not part of this plan, which is a mistake because the model of the family has changed a lot. So what you need is political will, but later on you need gender disaggregated data. We do have some, but still in Poland we miss a lot, and still we do not have many of this data available. But as I said, you need to hear what women need, and you have to hear women's voices. It means you need participation in political decision-making of women and women's groups, women's NGOs, women's movement. This is not the case. And tools are there. And I would not worry about tools, how to actually do the gender budgeting, because European Institute for Gender Equality, EIGE, has produced a very beautiful toolkit, this same as the one of gender mainstreaming, and for many others, you know, how to eliminate the wage gap. They are all there, but they need to be used. And the problem is that countries actually, and the level of the national decision makers, they are not so ready to use it. If I'm talking about Poland, Polish decision makers are very conservative, as I mentioned, and with this government, I doubt if it will change. Of course, you need to have specific actions and successes and so on. You need, for example, if we look at the very two core areas when the new recovery plan for Europe is going forward, it means digital transformation and the green transformation. Both sectors are very male dominated. It means energy sector and IT sector, and you need some focus specifically addressing women, women's education in IT, women's promotion in this sector, and some of the targeted actions. This is, by the way, the recommendation of the House of Commons, the Parliamentary Committee on Gender Equality, for the UK plans, that they do incorporate all the specific actions. This is, in Poland, we are very far from that. So, you know, what we need really to make it more specific. And also we need more actions in a broader context, you know, how to relate work and family, how to include this unpaid work into the GDP calculations. This is not enough to do just the gender budgeting. This has to come together with other actions. If I would think about calling it briefly, we have to move from the very traditional model of economy into the partnership model, which is much more than just to have the gender budgeting. This is a quite lengthy process, and I was wondering to what extent the European Union can play a role. And of course, the European Union is doing a lot, having this very powerful legislation in place. But how to make it a transfer from the legislation and the proposals and what you propose to the national level is a problem, because all the gender issues are soft issues and they are up to the national decision makers to decide how they want to implement the directives. And frankly, you know, when I'm thinking about what could be done, I'm really thinking more on the move, first of all, merging forces with the Greens and having a certain combination of the pressure from the, you know, bottom side. It means the Green movement in Poland and the women's movement in Poland could together fight for that. But at the same time, what you proposed is the pressure from the European Commission actually for countries to report on how they spend money. It's already many obligations in this respect. We have a special unit in the Ministry of Development who should follow, you know, gender mainstreaming and how the gender equality is represented in the spending. But so far, I must say, it's not very effective. So let me just maybe finish here. We could see if we can have some solutions, more practical steps to be taken. But I would say, first, what we need in Poland is to make a gender impact assessment of the recovery plan, national recovery plan, which would be properly done by a group of experts, hopefully with the support of the European Union, but also what you do, to link it and to have it. Because if not done by the government, I hope the best way will be to do it by the government, but if not, it could be done independently as a sort of a shadow report. And then we could have at least a ground on which we stand, and we will know what's at stake. My view is, looking at the situation in Poland, that we are moving backwards in gender equality because of what happened to the restriction of the abortion law, to the ideas to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, but also how the pandemic affected Polish women on the labor market. In Warsaw, every fourth woman lost their job, and unpaid work increased. And I must say 45%, as far as I remember from the recent survey, said that they cannot work from home because they have kids to take care about and some elderly parents. So this has to be solved, and I hope it could be solved together with other, countries, but also with the Green Movement. I think this alliance is very timely, and I really like to thank Eva for the invitation to this panel. So I will stop here, and will be happy to just have discussion later on.
Thank you, Eva, so much for this insight. And well, yeah, Alexandra and Eva have mentioned that the political will is a condition to change on the gender budgeting matter. And here I have a question for Ula. You are the women's rights fighter, not only on the streets, but on the parliament, Polish parliament. Can we talk about the political will on this subject, on the Polish parliament at all? And if this topic appears in our parliament, if there's any gender budgeting elements in the Polish Recovery Fund, and also I would like to ask you, not only in the perspective of the ruling parties, but the question. If there is any mention concerning the gender budgeting, for instance, in the opposition side. And finally, will Polish women benefit from the recovery plan adopted in Poland?
Thank you very much, Magda, and good evening, everyone. It's a very good question, and I think talking about gender budgeting in the current circumstances in Poland feels a little bit like a luxury, to be completely honest with you right now, because I have a feeling we are talking about women's rights in Parliament, but we are talking about absolute basics rather than making progress. We are in defense mode rather than progressing ahead. We are more and more often, since 2015 specifically, battling very backwards looking legislative projects introduced in Parliament, which are aimed to ban abortion either entirely or just about entirely. We are battling projects which mean to reduce or axe sexual education and any gender education from schools, and really are working very clearly against women, and we are battling a very toxic narrative from the high governmental officials. For example, from the Minister of Education, who keeps saying things publicly which sound like, I'm not exaggerating, like taken directly from some speeches by some authoritarian politicians. I don't want to even, call their names, from 1933. And I even have made a direct side-by-side comparison of some of those quotes, just to make sure I'm not really, you know, that's what is happening, and this is what is happening. So I feel we really are very strongly going backwards and really fighting for the basic freedoms. And the best example of that were huge mass protests that took place during the pandemic, literally at the peak of the second wave of the pandemic, starting in October, when a motion was put through to the constitutional tribunal to try and put a force through an ultimate, almost a ban on abortion, bypassing the parliament, and it actually succeeded. And hundreds and thousands of women, you know, went on the streets, despite of really of the peak of pandemic. And that is the best, I think, picture and an example of what is really happening. And yes, I did look into the Recovery and Resilience Plan, and you know, searched it through in the context of gender budgeting. And yes, it's there to a certain extent. There are our Polish Recovery Resilience Plan is a 500-page document, almost a 500-page document. And I counted, just to be precise, women being mentioned there exactly 47 times. And the gender budgeting, or you know, talk about the principle of gender equality, ensuring equal opportunities for all. It's there on 2 pages, page 90 and page 91, if you want to, you know, really go and have a read. It does propose solutions like building teleworking opportunities, improving access to internet, developing digital competences, secure childcare. Yes, it's there. It talks, at the same time, the talk is very general. In my opinion, we talk about that the recovery projects will comply with all accessibility standards, including principle of equal opportunities. We will prevent all forms of discrimination. We will comply with the principle, you know, of rights, equal rights for all. But whilst it does look okay on paper, I feel it's very theoretical, precisely because of what is happening in practice. And I feel like this is there to satisfy the European Commission, to get the European Commission to approve the funding, and then we'll see how it will look in practice. And in reality, the facts are quite, as I said, and the statistics are quite, are not very favorable for women. So our employment rate is lower than average, than the European average. The pay gap still exists, as my predecessor said. We have the legislative changes, which was the almost a full ban on abortion just now. Our politicians openly criticize and want to actually revoke the Istanbul Convention, Istanbul Convention, and it keeps coming back as a topic. And also even the social program, which is a kind of a flagship social program introduced by the government, by the current government back in 2016, that was meant to foster demographic growth. What it actually led to was it didn't foster the demographic growth at all, but instead it lowered the employment rate amongst women by another 2 to 3 percentage points. It put us back. And at the same time, it doesn't secure any pension support whilst women are taken out of the job market due to this program. So for all those reasons, I have deep concerns that the two-page fragments from our recovery and resilience plans are there just to tick the box, and the reality is very much going in the opposite direction. So I really would welcome any attempts to track and measure this from the European Commission, from the European Parliament, and to help us kind of monitor how it's executed and how the funds are invested, and whether this is happening in a really just and equal way. I'd really hope for this, but I think it does require actual tight measurements, because the 2 pages and the 47 mentions will not do it alone. So that's my view on this. Perhaps a bit pessimistic given the past years, which were quite intense, but I think I'm hoping it's picturing the reality we're in.
Thank you, Ula, so much for this insight on what is happening in Poland. I'm looking at the chat and the Q&A. We have no question. Eva, maybe you would like to ask some additional questions for our panelists?
Yes, I would like to make one comment and ask one question to Alexandra. Because people, sometimes they don't see how we can address at the same time green topics, so green transition, and address equality, gender equality. And I wanted to give you 2 examples for the same result, but going from 2 methods. For example, I remember that there was a program of the Embassy of Switzerland in Poland. It was a program for the thermomodernization of housing and installation of photovoltaics for single mothers. So at the same time,
Wrócił tam. Poczekaj, Jezu.
So at the same time, they had a climate result, and at the same time they had energy poverty. They addressed energy poverty, and they addressed gender inequality. So, and when the Austrians, just to recall that Greens are in the government as the smaller coalition, a smaller partner in the coalition, they decided to put 60% of the budget to the climate, but they made a big program addressing energy poverty. So it was not directly addressing women in the program, because with the partner from center-right, it was not possible. But they knew that addressing energy poverty, most of beneficiaries of this program will be women. So, and the single families and low-income public, and in this low-income public, and with bad housing, people with bad quality of housing, they knew that women will be in majority in this population. So without addressing it directly, they knew that they're addressing women. So you can find a method, political way to do it together. But I have another question to Alexandra, because I was really surprised when I read the first time the European Green Deal, the communication of the European Commission on the European Green Deal in December 2019, that there was nothing, no no one word about gender and gender equality and so on. And I was so shocked. So my question is, was it any debate on it in the European Parliament? Did you speak about that?
Okay, I'll address the last question first, if I may. Very honestly, I haven't addressed it, but just because I've been so busy with NextGenerationEU, and then my main field of politics is digital policy. And this is really, I mean, this is happening every day right now, and it's really urgent, and we have to hand in all our amendments by the day after tomorrow. So we have to finish tomorrow, basically. I just simply haven't had the time, but it's a very, very good point. And I discovered that the Green Group here in the European Parliament did in 2012 a gender impact assessment on their proposal for the Green Deal, because let's remember that the Green Deal comes from the Green Party and not from Ursula von der Leyen, and the Commission picked it up. And there was the gender impact assessment done with a lot of very valuable recommendations, which I intend to pick up as soon as I have time. And this brings us to your first question, which was extremely relevant because it's a question that's very often asked, and it's very important. And in the beginning, I thought it was sort of a dilemma as well until I started studying the issue. And then it gets really, really interesting, because actually addressing gender equality, you also improve sustainability and combating climate change and everything. It goes hand in hand, really. You mentioned one interesting example, and you said the Austrians have it in their national plan as well, on energy, poverty and housing for single mothers and so on. What I really like are the projects that see women more in the driver's seat, you know, not at the receiving end, but really taking the decisions. We know, for example, that women make as consumers, and they often make the choices in households and family, what is being bought, and they make more sustainable choices. There's a lot of research on this fact that women choose the sustainable product, that for them it's a criteria for choosing a product and so on. So that women as consumers are very important. Women as people, if they take decisions, and I think Eva mentioned that before, it's also gender budgeting is not also about distributing the money, but it's also about organizing a more democratic form of popular participation. So asking women's group, asking the women's movement, asking also other groups of the population, and not always the usual people who decide on who in politics. For example, on mobility, for example, urban mobility. You know, if you ask men what they intend by mobility, they will say we need streets for our cars and we need parking lots.
Exactly.
And if you ask women, they will say we need public transport and we need to be able to walk safely, because we walk with our children, we walk with the buggy, we walk with our elderly parents or relatives have trouble walking and who need a lot of space and so on, who need to be safe. And they don't call for roads, they call for public transport, for cycling paths and for walkways. So you make a lot more sustainable choices in cities where you listen to women. And Vienna is a great example for that. And in Vienna, they have some forms of gender budgeting that are quite advanced. And one thing that has really changed is the mobility in Vienna. So women make the world more sustainable if they're asked. There's even proof that women make more sustainable choices when they lead companies. Women, companies that are female-led with female CEOs or female majority in the board have reduced their CO2 emissions more quickly than male-dominated companies. And I thought that was crazy when I heard this for the first time, but I was told this by the European Investment Bank. They did the research. And this is something that when they invest in the rest of the world, what they call, you know, economic cooperation with the rest of the world development aid, this is considered obvious. The women are always involved in the decision making. It's just when it comes to Europe, they think, oh, it's already done and we don't need it. And that shows how important the political will is, because if you have women making the choices will be more sustainable and we will reduce our emissions more quickly. We will live in a more sustainable way. So it's really, there's no dilemma between choosing sustainability and greening and choosing gender equality. If you choose gender equality, automatically you choose greening as well.
That's a good answer.
Yes, this is an excellent answer, and we observe it at COP, every COP, so this climate summits. And when there was this action plan, climate action plan for gender, one of big topics was the decision making, and inside the negotiations. Because the delegations, we know that the consequences of climate change are more painful for women. Women are the first victims of climate change and climate disasters and so on, and migration, climate migrations and so on. And but at the COP, the delegation, national delegations are dominated by men, so they come from 7 to 40% of women. There are delegation with 7% of female members in the delegation, so they were trying to make it more equal. And after, when we study different bodies that make decisions, it's never equality between men and women. And when there are bodies that decide on finance, there are practically no women at all. So this is this decision making concerning money and how funds are spent. This is really a huge priority, and this is what we must fight for as women if we want to have equality, men and women, and more sustainable world, and achieving climate goals. So I believe that we came to the end, and I will just give you 1 minute to each of you for the word of conclusion, starting maybe by Urszula Zielińska, as she was the last one. Please, Ula.
Thank you. So I have to conclude more optimistically, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I couldn't find hope. So absolutely, the green policies honestly are, for me, that's a way to combine the two. Just as some of you just mentioned just now, it's in doing 2 in 1. If we can improve equality, that's great, and that's exactly what we're all about. So I just absolutely believe in this, you know, stronger European bonds, the green groups working across the countries, learning from one another, and then working with the European Commission and with the European Parliament to help strengthen the central measuring and monitoring. That's if that all works together, then we will improve it. Even in troublemaker countries like Poland, Hungary, you know, others. So that's what I'm working towards, and that's my hope. That's where I'm pinning my hopes on. And thank you for giving me ideas and some energy from where you are and where you're working on it. So it's really great to know and get that energy from you. Thank you very much.
So Eva, what is your conclusion? I would like to add that you are in the board of the Congress of Women. That is rather exceptional organization of women, and they not only in Poland, but there is Polish Congress on Women in Brussels, in Berlin, in Prague, in Vienna, in Paris. So Polish women organize themselves to debate, to find solutions, to organize themselves. It's wonderful. So the word of conclusion, Eva.
Yes, thank you very much again for listening, for an opportunity to listen to all these interesting presentations. I'm really very hopeful what Alexandra has presented. You know, I believe it's a next step, and it's a solid step. And I would like to maybe see the opportunities to use it also to be used by national level. So I'm wondering in what way this, what you do in the European Parliament, could be more linked of what we do in Poland, specifically in that national level, and how we can link, not necessarily going only through the government, but also using the women's movement, which is very strong, and green movement, I think, coming together for the purpose, because I think it's an opportunity. The pandemic and the recovery plan and this reconciliation is an opportunity to move ahead and to say, hey, women are the force, and we cannot forget the demographic context. Women are needed on the labor market. They also produce new labor if they give birth, etc. We have the force. So how to use it and how to change the system, which is now, unfortunately, still very oppressive for women, gender equality.
So, Alexandra, you have the last word.
Thank you so much. I don't need to say much because you're so great. You've already said everything. I would just like to add that this is, I think I share the view that we have a unique opportunity here with this process starting at the level of the European Union, the monitoring of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the awareness that has been raised around the ideas of economic equality, and especially this gender budgeting process starting in the European budget, because this will have a great impact in the long term. It will take a few years, but it will have a great impact on member states, and especially on member states as Poland, who have a huge share of those funds, and you really need this. Your government really needs those funds. So I think that's extremely important, and let's cooperate on this. Really looking forward to this. I think it's important when there's a strong pushback, as especially in Poland and a few other countries, to go forward even stronger. You know, not to stay on the defensive, but to try to fight for something else. And if you achieve some kind of economic equality, it's a lot easier to fight for rights as well, because women who have their own income are a lot less dependent also from the views of men, because, I mean, they're independent. They don't need to depend on men, and they express their views also more freely. And well, the last point, I think, was that you made that gender equality and greening go together. And this is why I think fighting for gender equality is so important for the Green parties as well, because it all goes in the same direction. And it's not the same fight, but they're two fights that are closely related. And I'm happy to be part of a party that really fights for both these issues.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Thanks, Magdalena. Thanks to all our panelists. And we will continue this discussion at our Green Summer University. For the first time, we will have with us a Green Congress of Women. So together with the Congress of Women, we will be all together. And we will continue also on this topic of finance and gender budgeting. Thanks a lot. And good luck to all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.